They called me a dinosaur because I didn't pepper every sentence with synergy and paradigm shift. They deleted me from their system like purging an obsolete file. But they forgot one thing: that obsolete file held the license key to their entire digital kingdom. When their website vanished into the void at 12:03 a.m., I was already in bed, coffee mug empty on my nightstand. I glanced at my phone, watched the notification pop up, and rolled over to sleep like a baby. My name is Maggie Doyle, and for 16 years, I was the invisible backbone of Tessarion Networks, 44 years old, graying at the temples, with hands that knew every server rack in our data center by touch alone. They used to call me the last fortress of IT back when that meant something. I remember my first day like it was yesterday, fresh out of my master's program, eager to prove that a woman could handle infrastructure just as well as any man. I built their systems from scratch, documented every configuration by hand in notebooks that still sit in my home office. When the servers crashed at 3:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve, I was the one who drove through a blizzard to fix them. When ransomware hit in 2011, I was the one who restored everything from backups I'd insisted on maintaining despite budget protests. 16 years of uninterrupted service. 16 years of training wide-eyed interns who'd eventually move on to Silicon Valley startups. 16 years of being the person everyone called when something broke, which was often. I knew every quirk of our legacy systems, every undocumented feature, every workaround that kept the digital blood flowing through Tessarion's veins. But somewhere along the way, the industry changed, and I became a relic. The new hires didn't want to learn command line interfaces or understand how packets move through networks. They wanted drag-and-drop solutions, cloud-based everything, and meetings about meetings. They spoke in acronyms I'd never heard and pitched solutions to problems that didn't exist. I adapted. Of course, learned the new tools, got my cloud certifications, even started using their productivity apps. But it wasn't enough, because I didn't speak their language, the language of disruption and innovation theater. I fixed things that broke. I prevented disasters. I kept the lights on. But prevention doesn't make headlines. Stability doesn't get you promoted. The writing was on the wall when they stopped inviting me to architecture meetings. My access to various systems began mysteriously expiring. My suggestions in Slack were met with polite emoji reactions, but no follow-up. The new CTO, Ramon, would walk past my desk without making eye contact, like I was already a ghost. They needed someone who could make PowerPoints sing, not someone who understood why our database queries were taking 3 seconds longer than they should. They needed someone who could sell the dream of digital transformation, not someone who knew that our current setup was perfectly fine if properly maintained. I felt myself being softly pushed toward the edges, like an old family photo slowly sliding off a tilted shelf. Each day brought another small indignity: a meeting scheduled during my lunch, a critical decision made without my input, a new hire who wasn't told I existed. But I kept showing up, kept monitoring, kept maintaining, because that's what I did. That's who I was. The guardian of uptime, the keeper of institutional knowledge, the one who remembered why we'd made certain choices 5 years ago that still mattered today. They thought I was obsolete, a dinosaur clutching her terminal windows while the meteor of progress streaked overhead. They had no idea that dinosaurs left fossils, and fossils, as any paleontologist will tell you, can reveal devastating truths about what really killed the giants. Aspen Reed arrived on a Tuesday morning like a perfectly curated Instagram post come to life. 27 years old, blazer sharp enough to cut glass, smile bright enough to blind. Her business card read, Digital Optimization Lead, a title so vague it could mean anything or nothing at all. Within minutes of her introduction, she was already talking about leveraging synergies and disrupting our digital ecosystem. I watched from my corner desk as she held court in the glass conference room, hands dancing through the air as she outlined her revolutionary vision for our infrastructure. The younger employees hung on every word, nodding along to promises of AI-driven everything and blockchain-backed databases. Nobody asked what any of it actually meant. Our first real interaction came that afternoon. She appeared at my desk, that practiced smile never wavering. So you're the famous Maggie. I've heard you're quite the expert on our legacy systems. The way she said legacy made it sound like a disease. I maintain our core infrastructure. Yes, I replied. not looking up from my terminal where I was tracking down a memory leak. She laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. Still using command line. How wonderfully retro. You know, there are GUI tools for that now, much more user-friendly. I could have explained that the GUI tools were just prettified wrappers around the same commands I was typing, that they added overhead and obscured what was actually happening. Instead, I just said, "This works fine." "I'm sure it does." Her enthusiasm was weaponized condescension. "We should definitely schedule some time to discuss modernization opportunities. I'd love to hear about your processes." Within a week, she'd inserted herself into every technical discussion. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd memorized all the right buzzwords, but had never actually debugged a production issue at 4 a.m. She'd reference industry best practices she'd learned at some weekend boot camp, dismissing years of carefully crafted procedures as technical debt. The younger staff gravitated toward her like moths to a flame. She was everything they aspired to be: young, confident, fluent in the language of disruption. When she suggested we migrate our entire infrastructure to a new, cloud-native solution she'd seen at a conference, they applauded. When I raised concerns about compatibility, data sovereignty, and the fact that our current setup was working perfectly fine, she smiled and said, "That's exactly the kind of resistance to change we need to overcome." She started scheduling innovation sessions at the same time as my system maintenance windows. She'd send emails about exciting new initiatives and somehow forget to include me in the recipient list. When I'd show up anyway, she'd act surprised. "Oh, Maggie, I didn't think you'd be interested in this forward-thinking stuff." The real power play came when she convinced Ramon to restructure the IT department. Suddenly, I found myself reporting to her instead of directly to the CTO. My admin privileges started disappearing one by one. First, it was access to the financial systems. You don't really need that for infrastructure, do you? Then the HR databases, then the development servers. "We're implementing role-based access control," she explained in a team meeting, her slides full of colorful diagrams. "It's all about security best practices." I wanted to scream that I'd been advocating for proper RBAC for years, but nobody had wanted to fund it. Now that Aspen suggested it, it was revolutionary. The room stayed silent when she unveiled the new org chart. My name had been moved to a tiny box in the corner, connected by a dotted line that might as well have been a question mark. "Maggie will be focusing on documentation and knowledge transfer," she announced. "Such important work." Around me, my colleagues avoided eye contact. These were people I'd trained, people I'd helped through production disasters, people who knew exactly what was happening. But fear is a powerful silencer. They had mortgages, families, careers to protect. Speaking up would mean painting a target on their own backs. So they stayed quiet, and Aspen's coup was complete without a single voice of dissent. She'd managed to reduce me from system architect to technical writer in less than a month, all while making it sound like she was doing me a favor. "Change is hard," she said to me after the meeting, that smile never faltering. "But I'm sure someone with your experience understands that adaptation is key to survival." I smiled back and said nothing, because she was right about one thing: adaptation was key to survival. She just had no idea what I was about to adapt into. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something was nagging at me, a half-remembered detail from years ago. At 2:30 a.m., I gave up and opened my laptop, connecting to what remained of my access. Most doors were closed now, but muscle memory guided me through the systems I'd built, finding paths Aspen didn't even know existed. I started with the old procurement records, the ones we'd migrated from paper to digital back in 2014. Nobody ever looked at these anymore. They were just archive data, gathering digital dust. But I remembered a budget crisis in 2016, when the company had frozen all software purchases right before a critical project deadline. There it was, buried in a folder marked FY 2016 Emergency Purchases. My name on a reimbursement form, Render Layer Pro, Enterprise License, $3,400 charged to my personal American Express, the software that rendered every single visual element on our company's web presence, from the main website to the client portals to the internal dashboards. I'd meant to transfer the license to the company's name once the budget crisis passed. I'd even filed the paperwork. But then there was the merger, and the CFO left, and the new finance team had bigger concerns. The reimbursement had gone through, but the license transfer had been lost in the shuffle. My fingers trembled as I logged into the Render Layer account I'd created 8 years ago. There it was. License holder M. Doyle, contact email. My personal Gmail, status active, expiration 7 days. The renewal notices had been going to my personal email all these years, and I'd been religiously forwarding them to IT procurement. But with my new focused role, I was no longer on the procurement distribution list. The last notice, sent 3 weeks ago, sat in my inbox, unforwarded. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't some minor plugin or auxiliary service. Render Layer Pro was the invisible foundation everything visual sat on. Without it, the entire web presence would simply stop rendering. No website, no customer portals, no demos for the sales team, just error messages and blank screens. I opened another terminal and traced through our infrastructure. Over the years, Render Layer had become so deeply integrated that removing it would be like trying to remove your skeleton while keeping your body intact. Every subsequent system had been built assuming it would always be there. It was technical debt of the highest order, the kind that only mattered if something went wrong. My cursor hovered over the renewal button. $99 for another year of service, a rounding error into Sarion's IT budget, but it was my $99, my credit card, my decision. I closed the laptop and tried to go back to sleep, but questions kept spinning through my mind. Was this even ethical? The company had reimbursed me for the original purchase, but they'd never completed the ownership transfer. Legally, technically, the license was mine. I thought about 16 years of overnight patches, of missed birthdays, of being called away from my nephew's graduation because the servers were down. I thought about the documentation I'd written that nobody read, the warnings I'd given that nobody heeded. I thought about Aspen's smile as she relegated me to a corner of the org chart. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I sat through Aspen's morning momentum meeting, where she unveiled plans to revolutionize our digital presence with some new framework she'd discovered. I nodded at the appropriate moments, took notes I'd never refer to, smiled when expected. But I also quietly archived every email about Render Layer. I documented every attempt I'd made to transfer the license. I saved every procurement email showing my removal from the distribution list, not because I was planning anything, just because documentation was, after all, my new job. The renewal notice arrived that afternoon. Your Render Layer Pro license expires in 6 days. Renew now to ensure uninterrupted service. I forwarded it to the generic IT procurement email, knowing full well that Aspen had restructured that process too. The email would sit in a queue, waiting for someone to figure out what it was and why it mattered. By the time they did, it would be too late. I marked my calendar, 6 days, then I went back to writing documentation about systems I'd soon no longer have access to, smiling at the irony that the most critical piece of our infrastructure was the one thing nobody had bothered to document at all. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m., mandatory attendance. The email had said, exciting organizational updates to share. I knew what was coming. The whispers had already started. The sympathetic glances from colleagues who'd gotten advance warning. 16 years, and I wouldn't even merit a proper goodbye. I wore my best blazer, the navy one I'd bought for my first day at Tessarion. If they were going to execute me professionally, I'd dress for my own funeral. The main conference room was packed, standing room only. I found a spot near the back, noting how people subtly shifted away from me like unemployment might be contagious. Ramon took the stage first, talking about optimizing for efficiency and aligning resources with strategic objectives, corporate euphemisms for bloodletting. Then Aspen stepped forward, and I knew my moment had come. As part of our digital transformation journey, she began, her voice bright and confident, we're restructuring IT to be more agile and future-focused. Click, a new org chart appeared on the screen. My name was nowhere to be found. Some roles, particularly those focused on legacy system maintenance, no longer align with our forward-thinking vision. She didn't look at me, but everyone else did. We thank these team members for their past contributions and wish them well in their future endeavors. That was it. 16 years reduced to a single passive-aggressive sentence. No mention of the systems I'd built, the disasters I'd prevented, the knowledge I'd accumulated. Just a clinical excision, like removing a tumor. "Maggie," Ramon said, finally making eye contact, "could you please stay after HR needs to discuss your transition?" Transition. Like I was changing states of matter, not being thrown away? The meeting continued with Aspen outlining her grand vision: AI-powered everything, blockchain-backed databases, a complete cloud migration that would revolutionize our operations. The younger employees nodded enthusiastically. The older ones stared at their phones, probably updating their LinkedIn profiles. When it ended, people filed out quickly, avoiding my gaze. A few brave souls murmured, "Sorry," or squeezed my shoulder as they passed. Sarah from accounting looked like she might cry, but nobody spoke up. Nobody questioned why they were firing the person who knew where all the bodies were buried in their technical infrastructure. HR was waiting in the small conference room, Kelly with her practiced sympathy face and a security guard who looked bored. The paperwork was already printed. 2 weeks severance for every year of service. Health insurance through the end of the month. Sign here to acknowledge receipt. Sign here to agree you won't sue. Sign here to promise you won't say anything negative about the company. "We'll need your laptop and badge," Kelly said gently, like she was asking for my firstborn. "Security will escort you to gather your personal items." I handed over the laptop that had been my constant companion for almost 2 decades. The badge followed, its edges worn smooth from daily use. They'd already disabled my accounts. I'd felt them die one by one during the meeting. Little digital amputations. The walk to my desk felt endless. The security guard followed 3 steps behind, close enough to grab me if I made a run for the server room, as if I needed physical access to do damage when I had something far more powerful: ownership of the one license nobody remembered existed. I packed slowly, methodically, my coffee mug with the faded "World's Okayest Sysadmin" joke, the photos of my nephew's graduation, the stress ball shaped like a server that Sarah had given me for Christmas. I left the documentation binders 3 shelves worth of handwritten notes about every system, every configuration, every quirk. Let them figure it out themselves. Box in hand, I walked through the office one last time, past the server room I'd spent countless nights in, past the conference room where I'd fought for every security update, every backup system, every redundancy that kept us running, past Aspen's office, where she was already meeting with her innovation team, probably planning which of my systems to break first. At the elevator, I turned back for a final look. 16 years, 5,840 days, give or take, hundreds of emergencies prevented, thousands of problems solved, millions of minutes of uptime maintained. "Ma'am," the security guard was getting impatient. I stepped into the elevator and let the doors close on my career. As we descended, I thought about the render layer renewal notice sitting in my personal inbox. 5 days left. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't make a scene. I didn't even update my LinkedIn status. I just walked out of the building with my cardboard box, got in my car, and drove home. They'd deleted me from their system like I was an obsolete file. Clean, simple, efficient, but they'd forgotten to check the dependencies first. And in 5 days, they'd learn what happens when you remove a load-bearing wall just because it looks old. The first day of unemployment felt like calling in sick when you're not. That guilty freedom of being home at 9 a.m. on a Friday, watching the world continue without you. I made coffee in my own kitchen instead of the break room, drank it from my rescued mug, and stared at my phone like it might apologize for everything. The email started around noon. Not from Tessarion, they'd scrubbed me from their contacts with surgical precision. These were from former colleagues, using their personal addresses. "Maggie, I'm so sorry. This is bullshit. Can't believe they did this to you. Let me know if you need a reference. Hey, wanna grab drinks? I might be joining you soon, LOL. I appreciated the sentiment, but their careful distance spoke volumes. They were sorry, but not sorry enough to risk their own necks. I couldn't blame them. I'd probably have done the same. The one that mattered came at 3:47 p.m. from a Gmail address I recognized: Kellen, Torres@gmail.com. Heard what happened. Those idiots. I'm CTO at Meridian Systems now. Remember that startup I mentioned last year? We're doing things right. No drama, no bullshit. Just good people building good software. We need someone who actually understands infrastructure. Understood. Kellen, my former team lead before he'd escaped to Sarion's gravitational pull of dysfunction. One of the few people who'd understood that preventing problems was harder than fixing them. I'd trained him back in 2012, and he'd never forgotten. I Googled Meridian Systems